Daern, Chapter 1, The Edge of the World. Part 5, Barry. Ugh, fuck! Barry swore as his foot slipped into yet another pool of muddy water. He hopped out of it, flicking the scum off his boot. Why do I always get the stupid morning shifts? He could barely see out here while the great moon still covered the sun. He started up the small hill that hid their camp from prying eyes. With each step he could feel his toes squish unpleasantly in his waterlogged boot. He made it to the top of the steep rise, almost more of a cliff than a hill. Barry balanced on one leg, pulled off his boot and sock, and tossed them away. The sock landed with a satisfying splat. His feet now cold in the light morning breeze, he stared out over the fen that they had taken refuge in. A little ways to the west of their camp, he could see the thin line of the main road as it snaked its way through the wetlands. He stared hatefully at it because it had become a symbol for all his bad luck. How the fuck did I end up with these people? 2 months ago he had been glad to put River's Crossing behind him. Now he found he actually missed the stinking place. He ran a hand through his long sandy brown hair and glared at the road with his brown eyes a few more seconds before grudgingly shifting his gaze elsewhere. He turned himself to keep watch over the entirety of the landscape. On the horizon in the east and stretching into the north was Daern, a large, foreboding forest, thankfully still many miles away. Closer to them in the north, where the land gradually rose towards those dark woods, was Stone's Cradle, its twin rocky guardians just visible in the pre-dawn gloom. He scratched his scraggly beard, what he wouldn't give to be in there, getting a clean shave and cozying up to a warm fire, in whatever passed for an inn here at the edge of civilization. That, however, was impossible. He glanced down into the camp. If all of us showed up at the gate, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't let us in. One, though. "Hey, Brandon!" a rough voice called from a stained canvas tent. It was one of Barry's companions, a pleasant fellow named Dawson. Barry clenched his jaw and looked pointedly away. 2 months, and you still don't know my name? Idiot. "Don't you fucking ignore me, you asshole. Any sign of him yet?" Dawson bawled. Even at a distance, it was amazing how his voice seemed to drill into your skull. "No," Barry said, not bothering to raise his voice. "What?" Dawson screeched back. "I said, wait. Yeah, there he is," Barry yelled back. Dawn had broken, and in the new light, Barry spotted a lone horseman trotting along the road, heading right for them. "Finally!" Dawson bellowed. By the sound of it, the rest of the camp's inhabitants had woken up. Dawson's voice had a way of doing that. A low rumble of excited voices drifted upwards. All eyes converged on a single tent. Their leader, Walter Corbin, stepped out into the brisk morning, donning a worn leather coat. "Good morning, boys," he grinned. Barry shivered at the sight of that mirthless smile. He turned away to watch the horse and rider grow larger with a rising feeling of dread. Ain't nothing good about this morning. The rider was now waving cheerfully, flipping his blond hair out of his eyes. Barry returned the wave half-heartedly, imagining the wide grin now spreading across the other man's face. How many times back in River's Crossing had that stupid toothy smile meant they would be eating good tonight, or that they had just scored big in a back-alley game of dice, or that they had better run because the guards were coming around the next corner. The horseman made his way off the road and sank behind one of the hundreds of steep rises. The road was only a mile away, but it would still be a half-hour until the rider could navigate his way through the maze of bogs. After cramming his foot back in his boot, Barry went down into the camp. The others were passing around a bag of cured beef. Walt had insisted that they light no fires this close to Stone's Cradle. Not that there was much dry wood out here anyways. The boss had taken a seat outside his tent. What exactly Walt had been doing before this little adventure of theirs, Barry didn't know, but figured it was something akin to breaking kneecaps. Walt didn't bother looking up when Barry approached. He was too busy scrutinizing their map, his chin resting on one ham-like fist. Barry suppressed a laugh. He very much doubted that Walt could even read the map. No, strategy was not one of Walt's better skills. That used to be my job. at least before Lakeside. "He'll be here soon," Barry muttered. Walt grunted and continued to stare at the map. "Can't believe I used to look up to this guy." It had been fun at first, exhilarating even. Walter had gathered them together, these men at the end of their luck in River's Crossing. He had shown them that it was possible to make it in the wider world. And gods forgive them, it had been easy. Away from the city, there weren't any guards to break up the fun. Like a miniature swarm of locusts, they had flown through the countryside around River's Crossing, taking enough food off farms to eat like kings every night, even managing to steal some fine horses one time. Barry had been the brains, Walter the brawn. Barry's first twinges of worry had come after lifting some food from an old barn. "Good work, boys," Walter had said with that grin, then thrown his torch into some hay. The others had cheered and hooted as the building flared up. "What in the mist did you do that for?" Barry had yelled at Walter. He had just shrugged and laughed. "Felt like it. Come on, let's go." "Gods, and I went with him." Barry shook himself as the men around him spoke excitedly. He looked up from the rock he'd settled himself on, to watch his oldest friend trot into camp. Barry couldn't help but feel relieved to see him, and opened his mouth to greet him. But Walt beat him to it. "Peter, about time. We was beginning to think you'd run off with some country girl." Walt laughed as he seized Peter by the arm and shook his whole body in greeting, while the rest of the crew chuckled. Barry glared at Walt and held back as the rest swarmed around Peter to slap him on the back. Peter laughed right along with them, as Walt steered him toward a seat near the map. As Barry watched Peter, he was visited with an image of a little dog pawing at his master's legs, begging for a treat. He shook the image away, feeling depressed. It was because of Peter that he had stuck around so long. "No, ain't no girl worth it in a place like that," Peter chortled. "So, what you got for us then?" Walt demanded, getting right to the point, his eyes suddenly hard and hungry. The rest of the group squatted around them, eager for news. Barry remained where he was, just outside the circle. "Well, we were right about a merchant being on the way to town. Trades good coin for the local Juma, or at least he should. It's good stuff, I can tell you that," Peter said with a wink. He had gotten up from his seat as he spoke, moving to the middle of the circle, gesturing energetically as though he were an actor in a play. Peter always did know how to put on a good show. That's why he had been so good at keeping people's attention back at River's Crossing, while Barry had slipped through the crowd and relieved them of their purses. "Should be showing up any day now, according to the townfolk. However, I learned something else interesting." Peter paused for effect, clearly enjoying the captivated attention of his audience. Barry rolled his eyes. "Come on, Pete, get on with it." "What is it?" Dawson asked eagerly, his dumb mouth hanging open in anticipation. "Seems we've shown up right on time. It's harvest season in Stone's Cradle, and apparently nearly every able-bodied man and boy will be out in the fields for weeks." The group stared blankly at Peter. This news didn't seem to have the effect he was looking for. His mouth thinned and curled into a badly disguised look of disgust. "It means there will be a whole town just sitting there, waiting for the taking." Walt's eyes gleamed as the rest of the band caught on to the idea. Talk erupted among the bandits, most of which centered around how much liquor each planned to steal for himself. Barry waved his hands, trying to settle everyone down. Wait a minute. There are only a few of us. Sure, half the town will be out in the fields. What about the other half?" "What about 'em?" Dawson answered loudly. "You scared a bunch of women and their brats, Bertram?" The other bandits chuckled. "It's Barry, goddammit. And just 'cause it's a bunch of women doesn't mean they won't defend themselves. You ever get hit in the head with a frying pan? I can tell you now, it don't feel good." Dawson waved dismissively at Barry. "Come on, Walt. We all know Bailey here is craven. Fucker nearly gave us up in Lakeside." The bandits' laughter died off. They all glared at Barry before turning their backs and looking to Walter. Peter shifted nervously. Walter rose and walked through the middle of the crowd. Barry's skin crawled as Walter clapped a hand on his shoulder, and turned to the rest of the bandits. He didn't, though. In the end, he stuck by us. That's what counts, isn't that right? Peter nodded, visibly relieved, and Walter took his hand off Barry's shoulder and then said, "Now listen, I've already got a great idea." Barry breathed a sigh of relief. He was only half listening as Walter laid out his plan, though. Dawson bringing up the incident in Lakeside had rattled him. Do they all really think so poorly of me? We used to get along well enough. Barry frowned. Well, after that stunt I pulled there, I guess it's no wonder they don't trust me. Barry wiggled his still damp toes and gnawed on a strip of dried meat as he brooded. You got that, Barry? It'll come down to you and Peter. Good chance to prove yourself, don't you think? Walter asked, his eyes boring into Barry's. Yeah, sure, Barry replied. Walter nodded sanctimoniously, as though Barry were a misbehaving child he'd mercifully given a second chance. My last chance. The group broke up around him as the last few details were hammered into place. Each man left looking more excited than they had in weeks. Since they'd fled Lakeside, times had been thin. There were fewer places to snag a meal this side of the city. This was our last chance. Last chance for what? Hey! Barry looked up and saw Peter standing there, his charming smile replaced with a more sober expression. You can't be saying stuff like that anymore. No one wants to hear it, and Walt ain't gonna keep standing up for you, Peter said. Is that what he was doing? Yes, Peter hissed. Now come on, we've got to get going. If you mess up this time, Walt will not be so forgiving. Peter turned to walk away. What do you care? Barry said quietly. Peter stopped mid-step and turned to glare at Barry. Of course I care. You're my best friend. Barry nodded sadly as he got up to join Peter. I hope so. Really, I do. Thanks for listening to Daern, a story in progress. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. And if you really enjoyed it, consider donating through Patreon. Any amount will go a long way towards helping us bring more content to you. Links to our Patreon and our website are in the description. See you next week, and have a good one.